The Cold War was not just a battle of ideologies between the United States and the Soviet Union, it was a vast and deeply entrenched system of power, profit, and paranoia. At the heart of this system in the United States was the military-industrial complex, a term popularized by President Dwight D. Eisenhower that described the powerful alliance between the military, defense contractors, and government policymakers. From the aftermath of World War II through the collapse of the Soviet Union, this complex played a central role in shaping U.S. foreign policy, technological development, and the national economy. But it also raised troubling questions about democracy, accountability, and the cost of endless militarization. This documentary-style article explores how the U.S. military-industrial complex evolved during the Cold War, how it influenced global affairs, and what its legacy means today. Origins: World War II and the rise of permanent war production. The roots of the military-industrial complex stretch back to World War II, when the U.S. mobilized its industrial might to become the arsenal of democracy. Massive corporations like Lockheed, General Electric, and Boeing began producing bombers, tanks, and warships on an unprecedented scale. Scientists and engineers were enlisted to develop technologies like radar, jet engines, and eventually the atomic bomb. When the war ended in 1945, many expected the U.S. to return to a peacetime economy. But the rise of the Soviet Union and the onset of the Cold War changed that calculus. The U.S. government began channeling vast sums of money into permanent defense infrastructure, justified by the need to deter communist aggression. Eisenhower's warning. In his farewell address in 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a former five-star general and supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, delivered a stark warning. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Eisenhower feared that the arms race and defense spending had created a system where profit motives and political interests were beginning to outweigh national security or democratic control. Yet by that time the complex was already deeply rooted. The arms race and defense spending. Throughout the Cold War, the U.S. poured trillions of dollars into its defense sector. The competition with the Soviet Union for nuclear supremacy drove massive spending on ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic bombers and submarines, air defense systems, spy satellites and intelligence technology. Major corporations like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics became household names within the halls of power, supplying everything from aircraft carriers to missiles. Congressional districts that housed military bases or defense factories became politically dependent on these industries. Jobs and economic stability were now directly tied to continued military expansion. The role of think tanks and policy influence. The military-industrial complex wasn't limited to factories and military bases. A vast web of think tanks, academic institutions, and lobbying firms worked to justify increased defense spending. Organizations like the RAND Corporation developed models of nuclear war and deterrence theory, influencing U.S. policy at the highest levels. Lobbyists ensured that Congress supported massive defense budgets year after year. Many high-ranking military officers would retire into lucrative jobs in the very companies they once awarded contracts to, a process known as the revolving door. Proxy wars and military engagements. The Cold War never escalated into direct combat between the U.S. and the USSR, but it led to dozens of proxy wars around the globe, many of which were fueled and sustained by the military-industrial complex. Korea, 1950–53. Vietnam, 1955–75. Latin America, CIA-backed coups and counterinsurgencies. Middle East, arms sales and intervention. Each of these conflicts required weapons, advisors, and funding. Defense contractors benefited, while policymakers framed these wars as necessary to contain communism. The space race and technological innovation. Interestingly, the military-industrial complex also spurred major technological innovation. The space race, largely a product of Cold War rivalry, was heavily driven by military objectives: satellites, missile delivery systems, and space surveillance. Technologies we take for granted today, GPS, the internet, and aerospace advances, grew out of this Cold War military scientific apparatus. But this innovation came at a cost: bloated budgets, secrecy, and a society increasingly shaped by defense priorities. Critics and whistleblowers. Not everyone accepted the dominance of the military-industrial complex. Peace activists, journalists, and politicians raised alarms about waste, corruption, and moral compromise. Daniel Ellsberg, a former RAND analyst, leaked the Pentagon Papers, revealing the government's deception about the Vietnam War. Senator William Proxmire regularly attacked Pentagon cost overruns and absurd military spending through his Golden Fleece Awards. Movies like Dr. Strangelove and books like Catch-22 reflected growing public cynicism about war profiteering and nuclear madness. Despite this, Cold War fears kept defense spending politically untouchable. The end of the Cold War, but not the complex. When the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, many believed the military-industrial complex would shrink. Instead, it adapted. New threats like terrorism, rogue states, and cyber warfare ensured continued investment in weapons and surveillance. Defense budgets soared again after the 9/11 attacks, and companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon thrived in a new age of forever wars. The U.S. military-industrial complex, born in World War II and supercharged during the Cold War, became more than a wartime necessity. It became a pillar of American political and economic life. Its influence shaped not only foreign policy but also domestic priorities, siphoning resources from education, healthcare, and infrastructure toward weapons development and endless military readiness. The Cold War may have ended, but Eisenhower's warning still echoes. The complex persists, more powerful and entrenched than ever, an enduring legacy of a conflict that reshaped the modern world.